Previously we ended at this slide, and what I want to do in this slide is complicate things slightly, and I'm doing that to give the interpretation of this model a slightly more realistic interpretation. Now, what we've done so far is we have looked at this model and said the economy will gravitate towards point A, which is an equilibrium point at the intersection of the two curves, which are sort of supply and demand curves. And so at point A, this country will have a current account surplus of $50 billion. It will also have, according to the S minus I line, outward foreign investment of $50 billion. Now, in interpreting that line, that vertical line, as savings minus investment, that's a bit of a simplification, an oversimplification. So it's really the interpretation of the S minus I line that I want to correct now. Previously I said savings might be 200 billion, investment might be 150 billion, so this country will have excess savings of 50 billion and they will send that money overseas. The problem with that is that it makes it sound like this country will have $50 billion of outward foreign investment but no inward foreign investment. It makes it sound like no foreign country is investing in this country, which is just not going to be the case in reality. So in this text here, I've actually created some more realistic numbers to give you a slightly different interpretation of the value of $50 billion at the bottom of this S minus I line. So ignore NX, ignore the NX curve. Let's just focus on the interpretation of the S minus I line and the interpretation of that $50 billion. Let's make it more realistic. So probably halfway down the text I've got EG. Well, actually a line above that I've got S minus I really represents net foreign investment, and the word net is key here. So what is a more realistic interpretation of this 50 billion? Well, I've got halfway down, I've got EG in this country. Assume that this country has outward foreign investment of $110 billion. So that outward foreign investment represents savings that are being made in this country that domestic residents of this country want to invest overseas. So outward foreign investment means that $110 billion from this economy is being invested overseas. At the same time, foreigners are likely to want to invest in this country too. So I've assumed that inward foreign investment is $60 billion. So now we're in a realistic situation, more realistic situation where this country is investing overseas and foreigners are investing in this country. But it's the net amount of foreign investment that we are interested here. And the net amount is, I've just spotted a typo, I've got net foreign investment then equals 100 billion, it should be 110 billion minus 60 billion, which is equal to 50 billion. So it's about 2/3 of the way down. Net foreign investment then equals, should be 110 billion, not 100 billion. So what we've got is we've got $110 billion of investment money, which you can think of as excess savings, leaving the country. But we've got 60 billion savings from other countries coming into this economy. So it is the net investment flow that we are interested in. So $110 billion of investment money heads out of this country, but 60 billion foreign investment money flows back in. The net foreign investment is $50 billion flowing out of this country. And that is a more realistic interpretation of what S minus I actually represents. As I said at the start of this slide, by just assuming that this country saves 200, invests 150 and sends the other 50 billion overseas, that really can lead you to believe that there is no investment money, foreign investment money coming into this country. And that is not going to be the case. Every country around the world has investment money coming into its economy and investment money coming out of its economy to go overseas. So this $50 billion we can still refer to it as excess savings, that's fine, but we can also refer to it as net foreign investment. Now, if this number of 50 billion, or if this number at the bottom of the S minus I line, if that number is positive, it is net outward foreign investment, and if it's negative, it's net inward foreign investment. So if it's negative, it means that in net terms, more foreign investment money is coming into the country than flowing out. Okay, next thing we need to do. What does this model tell us about current account, or about the current account? Well, it tells us a lot actually. What it indicates is that the current account balance, which is just proxied by this value nx, we've already discussed the difference between nx and the current account balance, and we'll continue with that simplification, that there is no difference between nx and the current account balance, and the results we get when we talk through this slide don't change by that simplification. You'll just have to take my word on that one. So what it tells us is that the current account balance is basically determined by the value of S minus I, or the current account balance is basically determined by the level of net foreign investment. If a country is in a position like Germany where it has more foreign investment money going out of its country than coming in, then it will run a current account surplus. It will have to. And in a country such as Australia, where the number in this model would be minus 50 billion, we've got more foreign investment money coming into Australia than we have flowing out. And it is because of that that we run a current account deficit. So current account deficits and surpluses really aren't so much about a country's importing and exporting. They're more about the net foreign investment flows in and out of those countries. So going back to this model representing, say, the position of Germany, because this country at point A is running a strong current account surplus, which is what Germany typically operates. Now you may be thinking, well, Germany is operating at a very favourably valued euro. Even if it was operating at the Deutschmark, chances are it would still be running at a current account surplus, even if it had never joined the euro. So let's not worry about that. So we've got the situation of Germany here, running a large current account surplus. So it's tempting to very often think of a lot of the Asian economies where labour costs are cheap, where they really focus their industrial policy on export-led growth. It's very easy to look at those countries such as Japan, more so in the past, but Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and increasingly countries like Malaysia, Indonesia and Thailand, and think these countries are excellent exporters. And they're excellent exporters because they produce what the world wants, but they have this advantage of very low labour costs. So a lot of people believe it's low labour costs which allow countries to be very export competitive, and to some extent that's true. But what about Germany? Germany still runs large current account surpluses, but there is nothing low about wages in Germany. Compare Germany to the United States. Germany still exports Mercedes-Benz cars, BMWs, Audis. They export a lot of other manufactured goods as well, like Miele products, Miele ovens and dishwashers that you use in your house. They all come from Germany. So why is it that Germany can continue operating a world-class car industry and export manufactured goods when at the same time we're reading so much about the United States and the collapse or the decline of their car industry and the decline of their manufacturing sector? What's different between these countries? Well, the answer to that one is a complex one, and I don't want to simplify it by any means, but let's just focus on one of the main issues here. Just one of the main issues, not all of them, because the answer to that question is too complex. One of the main issues is the savings rate. The savings rate, particularly among households in the United States, is incredibly low. The US government, over a long period of time, on average, has run government budget deficits, which is negative savings. So the savings rate in the US is very, very low. So imagine where America's S minus I line would be. It would be far to the left in this diagram, far to the left of Germany's. Germany, however, is a high savings country. Germany saves a lot of money relative to its own domestic borrowing requirements. So Germany can actually supply the rest of the world with more of its savings than a lot of other countries can. So Germany has a large outward net foreign investment. They invest more of their savings in other countries than other countries invest in Germany, and that's a function of a high savings rate. So we have here Germany with a high savings rate, maybe at point A, but the United States would be far to the left. And the United States would have a negative, well, the United States would have an S minus I line in this diagram, which has a negative value, and quite a large negative value. That would mean a much higher exchange rate and a much reduced ability to export. And so as I've got here in this slide, it's no coincidence that most high savings countries also have very strong export performances. And I've listed a couple of the countries there. So it's exporting, and being good at exporting is not all about low labour costs. It's not all about producing cheap manufactured goods that the rest of the world wants. It's also about having an exchange rate that makes the prices of your goods, your exports, competitive and attractive. And so in that case, the lower the exchange rate, the better. That's why Germany and Japan have an advantage. They're high wage countries, but both countries still export. And the reason is that they have a high savings rate. With a high savings rate, they have, in net terms, outward foreign investment, large outward foreign investment. So they are investing a lot more money in the rest of the world than the rest of the world is investing in their country. That type of imbalance in outward and inward flows of money from these countries means that their exchange rates are held lower than they would be otherwise, and it allows those countries to export. And we know what Japan exports: manufactured products, a lot of them high valued admittedly, but manufactured products, and that Germany is the same. And part of the reason for that, part of the ability of both Germany and Japan to export manufactured products, whereas we can't in Australia, the US can't, and the UK can't, I'm talking generally now, to a large extent, we're not as good at Germany and Japan as producing and exporting manufactured goods. A large reason for that is the savings rates relative to investment in Germany and Japan versus Australia, the UK and the US. Okay, in this slide I'm asking the question, what about a country that expends substantial effort helping its export sector, maybe with subsidies or some sort of favourable tax treatment, whatever the way, with the aim of boosting exports? Now we know if this country can actually help its export sector increase exports, the country will move from A to C. And we know from slide 13 that if that happens, there will be a benefit of those increased exports. Those increased exports overall will lead to, well, let me say that again, at point C relative to point A, there will be a higher level of net exports following this rightward shift in the NX curve. We learnt that from slide 13, and there will be a higher level of imports as well. However, the only way for this country to substantially improve its net trade performance, or its current account, is that this increase in net exports must be accompanied by either an increase in savings, which shifts that vertical line to the right, or a reduction in investment, which shifts that line to the right. Now, so we can either increase savings or decrease investment. Now, what I have said previously is that investment, is a type of proxy for the total borrowing that is undertaken in an economy. So in the past in past slides I've said savings might be 200 billion, investment might be 150 billion, and I've emphasized that that 150 billion is investment spending that needs to be paid for using the savings of that country. But investment type spending, that I in S minus I, the investment type spending is not the only reason that people borrow money in an economy. People also borrow money for what I call debt financed consumption. That is consumption that households undertake that they borrow money for. Now, I'm not talking about things such as houses. I'm talking about now, when I'm talking about debt finance consumption, I'm talking about more wasteful type of debt finance consumption. People sometimes borrow money to buy caravans and jet skis and go on holiday. They might borrow money for all sorts of consumables. Now, if a household borrows money to finance a house, I know this is subjective, but I would call that a reasonable reason to borrow money. You need somewhere to live. But do you really need to borrow money to go on a holiday? Is that an absolute necessity? The thing is, if we are considering a country which has a lot of debt-financed consumption, and a lot of that debt-financed consumption is things like jet skis and caravans and fancy cars and holidays that we could probably do without, then all of that additional borrowing is going to draw on domestic savings. So all of that debt-financed consumption borrowing is going to actually be part of the I variable in this model, and it's actually going to reduce excess savings. And so if we experience an increase in the amount of debt-financed consumption in an economy, what will happen is that that will reduce the level of excess savings overall, and it will shift the S minus I line to the left. That will appreciate the exchange rate and reduce the level of net exports coming out of our export sectors, and it will also increase our imports. So there's a very big price to pay for debt finance consumption, because at the margin, if we start all borrowing money to buy jet skis and fancy cars to tow the jet skis, that will draw upon our domestic savings, it will push up the exchange rate, and it will harm the ability of our export competing sector to export effectively. It will also encourage us to import more, which means domestic spending will be taken away from domestically produced goods, and it will sort of go towards these cheaper imported goods. So as an economy, we need to be very careful in terms of what we borrow money for. Now, countries such as Australia and the US, which are big current account deficit countries, if we don't want to reduce the level of investment spending in terms of capital equipment and infrastructure. However, we could shift this S-I line to the right in two ways. We could increase savings, or we could reduce the level of debt-financed consumption to the extent that debt-financed consumption goes on wasteful consumables. And in that way, we could actually shift the supply curve to, the S-I curve to the right. That's the first point that I wanted to make. The second point that I wanted to make is, let's think about a country that starts off with its S-I line far to the left in this diagram at a value of, say, minus 50 billion. So it is currently running a current account deficit, and it is actually bringing in foreign investment money equal to $50 billion each year to cover the shortfall of domestic savings over the domestic borrowing requirement. So this country's S-I line is vertical, but it's far to the left of the one I've drawn, and it's at a value of minus 50 billion. Let's just imagine putting in place policies which encourage savings. That could be such as compulsory superannuation. It could be a more favourable tax treatment on interest payments on domestic savings. It could be encouraging people, and this is kind of getting at the welfare side of the country. It could be putting in place policies that make people less dependent on the government and more dependent on themselves for things such as their own healthcare, their education, and their retirement. Those sorts of policies would actually lead or encourage people to save more. At the same time, we could encourage people, because we don't want to, what I'm trying to get at is, how do we shift this S-I line from minus 50 billion to 50 billion, to positive 50 billion? How do we get a country to sort of shift this vertical line to the right and improve their trade performance? One way, as I've just mentioned, is increasing savings and putting in place policies that promote more savings. Another one, of course, is having the government run current account surpluses, not current account, having the government run government budget surpluses, not government budget deficits. So there's a range of ways we can start shifting this S-I line to the right through higher savings. It's not easy. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but we could imagine how it could be done. Now, another way of shifting this vertical line to the right to try to depreciate the exchange rate and boost net exports, and therefore boost our trade performance and our current account balance, is to reduce I. Now, presumably, we don't want to reduce the type of investment that is productive in terms of investment in capital equipment, infrastructure, R&D. So are there any ways, then, that we could reduce debt finance consumption, which I've just gone through is really part of the I variable? To a large extent, that's going to be a cultural shift in countries like Australia and the United States. How do you get people in Australia going out and buying a new computer and then paying it off, so buying it using debt, maybe a credit card debt, and then paying it off, to saving the money first and then buying the computer? See the problem? That sort of change is just not going to be easy. So with countries such as Australia and the United States, which have an S minus I line which is very far to the left and add a negative value, hopefully you can see that trying to push this line to the right is very, very difficult. The easiest way to do it would be to just promote savings. Now, imagine a large increase in savings in a country, that would shift this S minus I line to the right. So this country went from, in net terms, receiving foreign investment to, in net terms, actually achieving net outward foreign investment. So it went from bringing in net terms, bringing in money from the rest of the world to, through an increase in savings, sending money out to the rest of the world. That's just the same thing as saying a rightward shift in the S minus I line. Now, if that happened, and that change was massive, if that happened in 1 year, it would lead to recession, because the increase in savings would cause consumption spending to plummet, and the economy would probably go into recession. However, if that rightward shift in the S minus I line occurred over, say, at 5 to 10 year period, then each year we could break up the rightward shift in the S minus I line into smaller movements. So each year the economy saves a little bit less, and each year we get additional downward pressure on the exchange rate, so the exchange rate depreciates a little bit each year. And then each year that depreciation in the exchange rate, driven by the rightward shift in the S minus I curve, that boosts net exports a little bit more. So if it was a slow process, then the export sector would actually have time to slowly adjust to this depreciating exchange rate, and the increase in exports could actually offset the decline in the decline in consumption spending that occurred, to actually lead to a higher savings rate. So just finally, let's go back to the case of, say, Germany. Germany's at point A, they're running current account surpluses, and they are lending, or they've got outward foreign investment of $50 billion a year. What does this imply Germany is doing? Well, Germany is sending $50 billion to the rest of the world. And that money is buying, and this is net investment flows, remember, they're sending $50 billion to the rest of the world. And that money is being used to purchase shares and bonds and real estate in other countries around the world. But then Germany is effectively receiving that money back through its current account surplus. So at the end of the year, Germany has sold $50 billion worth of exports to foreigners, and they're now holding $50 billion worth of shares, real estate and bonds, or $50 billion more than they had at the end of the previous year. Compare that to a country such as the United States. The United States is in the opposite situation. They have an S minus I line which is vertical at, say, a value of minus 50 billion, just for simplicity. What America is doing, at the end of a year, they have foreigners now owning $50 billion more of their shares, bonds and real estate than the foreigners owned previously. Kind of sounds like selling the country away, doesn't it? And at the same time, America has $50 billion worth of net imported goods. Now, if those imported goods are computer games, and fancy cars that will eventually depreciate to zero, what's America holding at the end of the day for those imported goods? Very little. So Germany, by saving a lot relative to investment, will be building up net foreign investment positions in other countries, and those foreigners will be then buying German exports, more exports than Germany buys of its imports, and those foreigners will be driving Germany's export sector. But the US will be in the opposite situation. They will be selling more and more of their assets to countries such as Germany as they absorb the money coming in from countries such as Germany, and they will be running trade deficits where they will be importing more from countries like Germany than they are actually exporting to countries like Germany. So this sort of gives you insights into what a current account balance is all about and what the main drivers of a country's current account balance actually are. The main drivers are whether a country or a country's net foreign investment position, that is, whether a country has a positive or negative S minus I value. It also highlights the fact that it's very difficult to move countries like Australia and the United States and the UK from current account deficits to current account surpluses. And while a country is running a current account deficit, as we've seen from this analysis, it will also be selling every year more and more and more of its shares, bonds, real estate and other assets to foreigners. In a way, it's the sale of those assets that finance the current account deficit. So what I've done there is use this model to illustrate a number of different things. Hopefully now you understand what the model is all about and how you will have to use it. The way you will have to use it is to move the NX and the S minus I curves around and explain how the economy is adjusting. So if the S minus I curve moves to the right, for example, show that the exchange rate depreciates, but you need to be able to explain why the exchange rate goes down. And if the exchange rate goes down, then exports go up. You need to explain why exports go up. And you need to be able to relate the movement from one equilibrium to another equilibrium to the balance of payments and explain how this model links to the balance of payments. And then towards the end of this set of slides, I then focused on the current account and what the main driver of the current account is, the current account balance that is. The main driver is a country's level of net foreign investment. So if you want to change a country's current account balance, to a large extent you need to change its level of net foreign investment. So you've got to get that country to a situation where it is saving so much money that it has more outward foreign investment than it has inward foreign investment. And so you need to think about the policies and how difficult it is trying to switch a country from being a current account deficit country to a current account surplus country. So how do we change Australia to be more like Germany? The simple answer is increase the savings rate closer to the German savings rate. But how do you do that?